Welcome back, fellow knowledge enthusiasts, to the deep dive, where we love to excavate those nuggets of wisdom hidden deep within a mountain of information. Speaking of mountains, did you hear about that new lunar real estate development? It's really taking off, but I hear the commute is a bit of a pain. Anyway, I'm Hari.
And I'm Kimi. Always a pleasure to be back, Hari, with you and with all our listeners as we embark on a journey to unearth another fascinating, perhaps lesser-known event from history.
That's right, Kimi. Today's deep dive takes us straight into the heart of the Apollo 15 postal covers incident in 1972. This whole saga really brings to light the complexities and even controversies that can erupt when you mix personal aspirations with groundbreaking achievements like going to the moon.
Absolutely. And we've got a whole stack of articles and reports ready to dissect. We're aiming to basically cut through all the noise and give you the clearest picture of what went down, without bogging you down with all the technical jargon.
Precisely. So, Kimi, let's set the stage here. We've got these three astronauts, right? David Scott, Alfred Worden, and James Irwin, the Apollo 15 crew. And back in 1971, during their lunar mission, they took along a rather significant number of unauthorized postal covers. And get this, these covers even touched down on the moon's surface, tucked away in the lunar module Falcon.
Yes, about 400 of them. And these later became known as Seeger covers, named after a West German stamp dealer, Hermann Seeger, who ended up selling some for a pretty hefty sum, bringing a whole new commercial angle to this space exploration thing.
Talk about a lunar side hustle. But, to really grasp the astronauts' motivations, we've got to delve into the financial side of things, right?
Right. They'd struck a deal with this guy, Horst Eiermann, agreeing to take these covers in exchange for a payment, something like $7,000 each.
Which in today's money, with inflation and all, works out to be, wait for it, around $53,000 each. A pretty significant chunk of change.
Indeed. And the astronauts apparently intended to use this unexpected bonus to set up a trust fund for their kids.
Makes sense, right? I mean, considering the risks they were taking and the fact that life insurance back then for astronauts wasn't as readily available as it was for, say, later Apollo missions.
Yeah, definitely adds a layer of human complexity to the situation. But let's retrace the steps of these spacefaring envelopes, shall we?
So picture this. Scott, the mission commander, gets these covers postmarked on launch day, July 26, 1971. Then he kind of sneaks them on board in his spacesuit pocket, not exactly listed as official personal items.
A bit of a lunar loophole, you might say.
And these covers, they spent a good few days on the moon, right there in the Falcon, from July 30th to August 2nd. Talk about a lunar vacation for some envelopes. Finally, they got another postmark, this time on the recovery ship, the USS Okinawa, on August 7th, the day they splashed back down to Earth.
Yeah.
What a journey.
A true postal odyssey. But hold on, there's even more to uncover. Worden, he also brought along his own set of covers. That's right, about 144 of them, mostly for someone he knew named F. Herrick Perrick. And the interesting thing is, these covers were actually approved for space travel, quite different from those unauthorized Seeger covers. So all in all, we're looking at around 641 covers that flew on Apollo 15. Quite the postal load.
Wow, a veritable lunar mailroom. But eventually, NASA caught wind of all this extracurricular activity.
Oh, they did. And they weren't exactly thrilled. You see, NASA found out about those approved Herrick covers being sold towards the end of 1971. This prompted Deke Slayton, the head honcho of astronaut selection, to give Worden a gentle reminder, about keeping things professional and avoiding commercial ventures. But it was the news of the Seeger deal, that secret financial agreement, that really set things ablaze. And let's just say, Slayton didn't mess around.
Yeah, he grounded those astronauts faster than you can say launch aboard. Slayton removed all three of them from the backup crew of Apollo 17, even though by that time the money from Seeger had been returned. Talk about a firm stance.
Absolutely. NASA was sending a message loud and clear. We're here for science and exploration, not for personal profit. Maintaining public trust was paramount.
And the repercussions didn't end there, did they? This wasn't just an internal NASA matter.
No, it wasn't. June 1972. The whole Seeger affair exploded in the media. Bad press everywhere. The astronauts found themselves in hot water, facing accusations of breaching public trust and, basically using their positions for personal gain.
Public image tarnished, you might say.
Precisely. The scrutiny was immense. It even led to a closed-door hearing by a Senate committee where the Apollo 15 crew had to explain their actions. And perhaps the most significant outcome was that none of them ever flew in space again. Their careers with NASA essentially grounded.
Wow. A stark reminder that even heroes can stumble. But, Kiwi, I think it's important to zoom out a bit and look at the broader context here. This was the era of the Apollo program, a time when space exploration captured the imagination of the entire world. And with that came a surge in interest in anything and everything space-related, including, well, stamps and postal covers.
Oh, absolutely. Astrophilately, they call it. Collecting space-related stamps and covers. It was all the rage during the Apollo program. Collectors went crazy for items linked to those missions, especially covers. I mean, the Kennedy Space Center post office was bustling with activity on launch days, just canceling covers sent in by the public. Everyone wanted a piece of the space race, you know?
A tangible connection to those historic moments. But, this whole incident with the Apollo 15 crew wasn't exactly the first time astronauts dabbled in, shall we say, space souvenirs.
Right. There have been some, let's say, informal dealings before. Take Harold G. Collins, for instance, big shot at Kennedy Space Center. He'd been arranging special envelopes for various missions, getting them canceled on launch day. These weren't flown in space, mind you, but they were often given as gifts to friends of the astronauts, folks at NASA, contractors, that sort of network. So there was already a bit of a culture of exchanging space-related items.
An unspoken souvenir economy, perhaps.
Yeah.
But there's more. It later emerged that 15 astronauts from Apollo 7 all the way through Apollo 13 had actually signed a deal with that same Horst Eiermann, the guy from the Seeger cover deal. This time they were signing things like postcards and stamp blocks. Yeah, these weren't flown in space, but the astronauts each got $2,500 for their signatures. So clearly there was some entrepreneurial spirit brewing within the astronaut corps.
There was indeed. And then there's the whole matter of personal preference kits, or PPKs as they called them. NASA allowed astronauts to take these small bags with them on missions for souvenirs, with limits on size and weight, of course. But as the Apollo program advanced and we started landing on the moon, well, anything that went to space, especially to the moon, suddenly became highly sought after.
The ultimate collector's items.
Exactly. And covers had been flown on previous missions, too. Apollo 11, 13, and even 14. Apollo 14's lunar module pilot, Ed Mitchell, actually took his covers to the lunar surface. And did you know, Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon, held on to his Apollo 11 covers until he passed away. One of them sold for a fortune back in 2018.
Wow, that's quite a legacy. But let's circle back to Herman Seeger, the stamp dealer at the heart of the Apollo 15 incident. How did he even get involved in all of this?
Well, it all started with Horst Eiermann. Remember him, the guy who brokered the deal with the astronauts. He was well-connected, a friend of Deke Slayton, and a representative for a NASA contractor. He bumped into Seeger at an Apollo 12 launch viewing back in late '69. Seeger got the idea for lunar covers after hearing that the Apollo 12 crew had taken a Bible to space. He saw an opportunity, and knowing Eiermann's ties to the astronauts, he suggested they try to persuade a crew to take these covers to the moon. Interestingly, he framed the payments not as direct compensation, but as investments for the astronauts' children.
A clever framing, to say the least. So how did they actually go about preparing these Seeger covers?
It was a collaborative effort. Scott, the commander, designed the cachet himself using the Apollo 15 mission patch. He gave the design to Harold G. Collins, who took care of the printing. They used standard and lightweight envelopes. And get this, the 10-cent First Man on the Moon stamps were affixed to those lightweight envelopes by secretaries in the astronaut office. The covers even went through a fireproofing process courtesy of the flight crew support team, who mistakenly thought they were all above board. Oh, and here's a fun fact. Worden also took along a cover postmarked in 1928, signed by Orville Wright, the aviation pioneer. Talk about connecting different eras of history.
That's amazing. But as we've seen, this whole incident wasn't without its predecessors. NASA had already dealt with some internal controversy when the Apollo 14 crew took souvenir medallions with them. Some of those medallions were later melted down and used in Franklin Mint promotions, which raised some eyebrows.
Yeah, it definitely sparked some debate about the appropriateness of profiting from space missions. The Apollo 14 crew didn't get paid directly for those medallions, but it did lead Slayton to, tighten the reins on the Apollo 15 crew. He cut back on how many personal items they could take and specifically warned them against carrying anything that could lead to personal profit. And keep in mind, there are already regulations in place from 1965 requiring approval for any items astronauts wanted to take, and those 1967 standards of conduct clearly stated that you couldn't use your position for personal gain. So it's safe to say the Apollo 15 crew knew they were pushing the boundaries.
Walking a fine line, for sure. But one particularly fascinating detail of this whole affair involves Carrie Bess Carsey. She was a notary public working in the astronaut office. And guess what? She notarized the signatures on 100 of those Seeger covers, stating they'd been on the moon.
Now, here's the thing. As a notary, she wouldn't have had personal knowledge of that fact. This led to an investigation by the Texas Attorney General. They wanted to know if she'd improperly notarized those documents. And, well, it turns out this certification, despite its potential legal issues, was a specific requirement from Seeger. He thought it would make those covers more appealing, give them more legitimacy, especially for European collectors who place a lot of weight on a notary's verification.
Interesting. So even though the astronauts eventually returned the money, they did initially accept the payments. In fact, before NASA even knew about the deal, the Apollo 15 crew had already opened bank accounts in Germany to receive those funds.
They had, but perhaps sensing that things weren't quite right or maybe anticipating the backlash, they ended up giving those bank books back to Ironman and refused to take any compensation. They even turned down some aerospace-themed stamp albums that were meant for their kids. Clearly, they were trying to distance themselves from the whole arrangement.
A bit of a belated attempt at damage control, perhaps. But despite returning the money, the legal consequences didn't just vanish into thin air. In 1983, Worden filed a lawsuit against the government, arguing that they had seized 298 of his covers without a proper hearing.
That's right. He claimed it was a violation of his rights, and ultimately the Justice Department decided they couldn't really fight that lawsuit. So in an out-of-court settlement, all those impounded covers, 298 belonging to Scott and Irwin, and 61 of Worden's Herrick covers, were returned to the astronauts in July 1983. Ironically, NASA itself later planned to fly and sell a whole bunch of postal covers on the Space Shuttle STS-8 mission.
Wow. Times change, I guess. So where did all those controversial covers end up? Well, some of them hit the collector's market. One Seeger cover even went for over $50,000 at auction in 2014.
They certainly retain their value. And Worden, he actually sold a lot of his Herrick covers to cover, well, campaign debts from an unsuccessful run for political office, a tangible reminder of the financial ripples of this whole affair.
Indeed. So as we conclude our deep dive, let me leave you with this. The Apollo 15 astronauts, they initially wanted to provide for their families, right? But then we see this whole issue of commercializing space memorabilia. Does this incident really highlight a fundamental clash between personal needs and public expectations, especially in those early days of space exploration when everything was so new and, well, a bit uncharted?
A thought-provoking question, Hari. Certainly gives us all something to ponder. The interplay of personal ambition, public duty, and those emerging commercial possibilities, especially in the realm of space exploration. It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
Well said, Kimi. And to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Apollo 15 postal covers incident. We hope we've shed some light on this fascinating and perhaps somewhat controversial chapter of swing's history. It's a reminder that even seemingly small actions can have big consequences, and that navigating those ethical boundaries can be a tricky business. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and until our next deep dive, farewell.
Farewell, everyone. And as always, keep reaching for the stars.